Hi there, I'm Ahsan Shaw, and you're watching me on YouTube and Facebook Live. I'm a business writer and business analyst and a freelance writer. More than 150 business research academic articles are published under my name. And today we are going to talk about currency as power and knowledge as power. Uh, it's a continuation of the topic that we have been discussing for the past 2 or 3 weeks. And today we will discuss how knowledge should be the power, but instead, currency is the power. To discuss this topic, my guest is none other than Edward Konowicz. He has joined us from Virginia West, and he taught at the college and university level for the past 25 years, and he is a very intellectual person. Now it's time to introduce you to him.
Well, I've
Hi,
I've
Ed.
taught at the college. Hi, Ahsan Ali. I taught at the college level,
Uh,
which is
okay,
post high school, for about 25 years. I taught at one college or university for 20
okay,
years, the last 20
okay,
years. But
okay, okay.
the topic, though, in economics, and of course,
Mhm,
knowledge, which is more cooperative knowledge, should be the
mhm,
basis of economics. But economic reality is different for what class you're in. There's a lot of different economic classes.
mhm,
And if you're a government official,
mhm,
economics is different than if you're a government worker. It's different if
mhm,
you're an oligarch. It's different than if you're a banker. It's
mhm,
different if you're an engineer. It's
mhm,
different if you're a farmer.
mhm,
We can generalize in economics, and we're going to do that. But the
mhm,
reality is different for each economic level. And we could
mhm,
say the three, which I don't agree with. The West says there's the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class. I think
mhm,
there's probably about 10 or 20 different economic levels. And the
mhm,
reality of economics is different for each of those levels.
mhm.
So
So you are
when we
approaching this topic from the social class point of view.
could you repeat that? The voice
Okay,
there was
okay,
interference.
okay. You want to approach this topic as on the basis of social class or on the basis of economy, or both are the same thing.
Well, they're both almost the same thing, but we have
Mm-hmm,
to recognize, first of
mm-hmm,
all, that the reality of economics, even in philosophical terms, is
mm-hmm,
different for different classes of people
mm-hmm,
or different jobs.
mm-hmm,
And we could get into too much detail and we could generalize too much. So
mm-hmm,
I'm starting with a disclaimer
mm-hmm,
that some of the conclusions we can come to
mm-hmm,
is different for different occupations and different classes. But the real thing I think we have to get to, which is
mm-hmm,
currency and why knowledge isn't valued as much,
mm-hmm.
is that
Uh,
agreement or um, exchange is valued. That is business. Agreement and exchange is valued more than knowledge.
mhm,
So it
mhm,
generally isn't the engineer in
mhm,
charge of the
mhm,
business. It's generally a business major who is going to negotiate agreements.
mhm.
But the underlying thing, we have three underlying concepts, I think.
Okay.
We have belief,
Mm-hmm,
we have love,
mm-hmm,
and we have what could be called biological energy.
mm.
And I want to kind of make a general point before I get into currency, because
Okay. I
currency is
think
like energy.
we have also discussed it in, I think, in the earlier videos, that how belief, values, and the culture, all of these things are associated with one another. Isn't it the same case here?
Yes, we discussed, and I think it was a very important topic, that belief
Mm-hmm.
or credibility
Mm-hmm.
is largely the basis of economics.
Mm-hmm.
That those in power represent a
Mm-hmm.
belief system.
Mm-hmm.
And when people believe, they give their so called energy. I don't know another term. We have a
Mm-hmm.
certain amount of energy to live.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to develop a concept here before we get into knowledge as power or belief.
Mm-hmm.
And animals are stronger than us, like a tiger.
Mm-hmm.
Tiger is a lot stronger than us. How come?
Mm-hmm.
If life is fair,
Mm-hmm.
which is if we're more intelligent and
Mm-hmm.
compassionate than a tiger, shouldn't we
Mm-hmm.
be stronger than a tiger? And the
Mm-hmm.
answer is we are stronger,
Mm-hmm.
but our energy goes to the herd, to the
Mm-hmm.
town or the city or the state. So
Mm-hmm.
though the tiger can kill one of us, the town or the city can kill the tiger.
Yes.
So most of human energy
Mm-hmm.
is in the herd.
Mm-hmm.
Most of your and my energy
Mm-hmm.
is in the city, the town, the family. It's not in ourselves. The
This
tiger,
is.
most of his energy is in the
Mm-hmm.
tiger.
Yeah, you have mentioned a very good point here that the energy we have got is the collective power. I think this is the basis of economics that we are social beings. We love to live in groups and in societies, and we make societies.
Yes, so currency represents the collective
Mm.
energy.
Yes. Mm.
And most of our energy, because compared to we can't run as fast as a gazelle or a
Mhm.
cheetah, we're not as
Mhm.
strong as a chimpanzee,
Mhm.
we don't have claws. What we have
Mhm.
is a powerful herd or
Mhm.
collective energy.
Mhm.
So most of our individual energy is in the collective, and
Mhm.
that's what currency largely represents.
Mhm.
So we have a lot of energy, but who commands the collective, whether it's an oligarch or a
Mhm.
government official, has
Mhm.
use of that energy or currency. Now, in a family or with our
Mhm.
friends, a lot of that energy is called love.
Mhm.
So a mother and father take care of their children, and the exchange is love, which is
Mhm.
the mother and father love the children, and the children then later take care of the mother and father.
Mhm.
But today, the love is being changed into currency, which is in the West, women are working, mothers are working, and
Mhm.
then they pay for a daycare center to take care of their children, or the collective pays for a school for the children to be in school while the parents work.
Mhm.
So the functions used to be done by the family, such as
Mhm.
teaching, education,
Mhm.
and feeding and stuff like that, are now being taken over by economics.
The role has
So
been changed. The role of the family and the role of every member of the family has been shifted and changed. Is it planned?
ye- yes, and it is to create more economics.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, energy, which I would say we could call love energy, is being converted to currency.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is knowledge should be power. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
for a car mechanic, for a um, uh, electronic technician, or for an engineer, if they
Mm-hmm.
can't fix something, design something that works, then they're not
Mm-hmm.
going to earn their money.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a government official and
Mm-hmm.
you do a program that fails or
Mm-hmm.
goes into debt, you still get paid.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a different economic reality. If you're an engineer or a mechanic, you
Mm-hmm.
have to have knowledge and you have to be able to fix something,
Mm-hmm.
because if you can't fix or install something, you're not going to have your job.
Yes, they will
So
take
we,
away your money.
right. But that's not true about brokers and financial advisors. They can lose people's money and still have a
Mm-hmm.
job
Mm-hmm.
because they can blame it on the market and claim it was not their fault.
Mm-hmm.
So
Just
in the
like the
collective,
corporate, just like the stock of the corporations.
yeah, just like the stocks go down, it's
Mm-hmm.
blamed that they're not selling. It's blamed
Mm-hmm.
on the market.
Mm-hmm.
It's not blamed on the broker or the
Mm-hmm.
financial advisor. Now, of course, if a financial advisor performs better,
Mm-hmm.
he or she advertises that, and that will increase their clientele and their commissions.
Mm-hmm.
But for some people, knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm.
If that car mechanic has a lot of experience,
Mm-hmm.
he can do a job quicker than one without the experience. And in the
Mm-hmm.
United States, a car mechanic is paid by
Mm-hmm.
the particular job they do, which is whether replacing the water pump, replacing the transmission, or
Mm-hmm.
replacing the brakes. They're
Mm-hmm.
paid,
I would,
and if they can do it in a half an hour instead of an
mhm.
hour, they make twice as much.
I would
So
like
knowledge
to
is power.
I would like to add something here that knowledge is supposed to be the power, and it has been power for centuries. But now, in the recent years, for the past 3 or 4 or 5 decades, it is completely changed now. Do you think it is the monopolist they're doing? They just want to control the world with their present power.
Well, there is tyranny. I think
Mm-hmm,
the collective
mm-hmm,
is being maneuvered by a few people,
mm-hmm,
and the collective requires more consensus than it does knowledge.
mm-hmm,
So those people who can impose a consensus. Now,
mm-hmm,
democracy is not a consensus.
mm-hmm,
I mean, you could have a bunch of generals meeting over on how
mm-hmm,
to conduct a war,
mm-hmm,
and by their political leaders, they're given certain orders,
mm-hmm,
and then they come up with a consensus, and
mm-hmm,
that consensus is not a democratic process.
mm-hmm,
So we're told that economies today are either socialistic or capitalistic,
mm-hmm,
but really they're more an imposed consensus, and the media, particularly television, newspapers, and the internet,
mm-hmm,
play a major role in creating the consensus which is imposed.
mm-hmm,
So the knowledge, such as engineering knowledge, medical knowledge, is being replaced by
mm-hmm,
consensus skills. Those that can impose the consensus are given more credit than those who have the knowledge.
mm-hmm.
And of course, those with knowledge that are able to promote the consensus, who are dishonest and not really faithful to their knowledge, they get promoted in culture. So
So
I
it
think
means,
we have to look at today, a lot
mm-hmm,
of economics is consensus.
mm-hmm,
And that's not going to be knowledge. It's going to be what is presented as the majority opinion. I don't think
mm-hmm.
there is a majority opinion. I think there
Do
is a,
you think that the people who have the knowledge, they are intentionally kept down?
well, I think knowledge is a threat to
Yes.
control.
It,
It's
yes.
to have a certain amount of expertise
Mm-hmm,
is a threat. And what then people are called conspiracy theorists
mm-hmm,
because there's a group of people, a lot of academics, who
mm-hmm,
feel that the people in power have ulterior motives, that
mm-hmm,
they're not doing things for the benefit of the people, they're doing
mm-hmm,
things for the benefit of themselves and their financial backers and their financial interests.
Mhm.
So the question is, are people in power sincere, or do they have ulterior motives?
Mhm.
And expertise may reveal, for
Mhm.
example, like the wearing of masks,
Mhm.
is that for the public good, or is
Mhm.
that a part of a control function, which is
Mhm.
to wearing a mask make people sicker by
Mhm.
increasing their CO2 and bacterial infections, or do
Mhm.
they reduce the spread of viruses? And if experts really, because you have experts that disagree.
Mhm.
And I think you'll find that in most of science or knowledge that you'll have experts that disagree. So the
Mhm.
real question is one of choice, that you have a freedom, whether we
Mhm.
call that the free market, whether
Mhm.
we call that the um, freedom of choice.
Okay,
There are
we can take.
financial interests
Mhm.
that don't
Oh,
want to give people freedom of choice.
okay, we should take we should look at a very recent example, even the current example of COVID-19. We were told in the beginning that the virus, WHO, World Health Organization, it told us and around the world, it told people around the world that the virus was contagious, and they kept pushing their belief for around about 4 or 5 the whole year. And late at the end of the year, they are telling us now that it's not contagious anymore. So the question is, if it is not contagious, then why the government officials are pushing people to wear masks?
Well, I would phrase it differently.
Hmm.
I would say let's assume that
Hmm.
it's somewhat contagious.
Hmm.
And this was the initial thinking, was that mask would slow down the contagion,
Hmm.
which is you can't stop something that's contagious with the public. You can isolate a few people in um, hospital care facilities where you
Hmm.
have real precautions, which is
Hmm.
not only masks but foot
Hmm.
coverings, gowns, a high level of sterilization. But you
Hmm.
can't do that with the public. You
Hmm.
can't put the public in gowns
Hmm.
and foot coverings and hair coverings and goggles and masks. You
Hmm.
can't properly protect the public. So the
Yeah.
cloth mask at best
Hmm.
would slow it down.
Hmm.
So if something's contagious, eventually everyone will be exposed. So the emphasis is claiming there's a
Hmm.
surge,
Hmm.
and we no longer have reliability in the
Hmm.
information that we're getting.
Hmm.
So we don't know if there's a surge. The PCR test is not
Mhm,
valid. And
mhm,
the reason why the PCR test is not valid, it can have a false positive and a false
mhm,
negative,
mhm,
just depending on who gives the test and
mhm,
how it's conducted. So we don't have a reliable test, so we don't have
mhm,
reliable statistics.
mhm,
So the initial concept of 2 weeks of wearing a mask to slow
mhm,
down the spread. At this
mhm,
point, and this is what those in power fear, that people have reason. If millions of people have had the virus,
mhm,
that means most are going to be exposed to it within a year or two. And you
mhm.
can't stop it, you can only slow it down.
Yes.
So why create policies that destroy the economy and stop people's jobs when
Mhm,
the overall effect is not going
mhm.
to be really very good? I mean,
Yes.
people are going to get it one way or the other.
Yes. All of your actions, policies, they are not going to work. Your lockdown, your shutdown of businesses, and people are losing their jobs, and unemployment rate is getting higher. So Where are we going?
Well, it has to do with credibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's how long are people going to believe their leaders and the
Mm-hmm.
medical experts, which is, are they going to be wearing a mask for 5 or 10 years or
Mm-hmm.
more?
Mm-hmm.
And then are they going to believe them that a vaccine works
Mm-hmm.
when the test for it working is producing antibodies, but
Mm-hmm.
then we don't know if those antibodies work. So there's very little validity. There's very little science in what we're being told.
Mm-hmm.
But economics and politics is based on consensus.
Mm-hmm.
Consensus is being imposed. So the
Mm-hmm.
question is, with modern surveillance and communication, how
Mm-hmm.
do we get freedom of choice when the
Yes.
consensus is being imposed?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, knowledge is no longer power. We can
Mm-hmm.
cite the studies that
Mm-hmm.
prove a mask cannot stop a virus,
Mm-hmm.
but
And you have
that
you have just mentioned a very good point. Uh, Freedom of choice. And the way governments of the world, they are pushing us to do certain things, to take certain actions. So in that case, do you really think we have the freedom of choice?
well, that's being removed. The question is,
Mhm.
what is the basis of freedom of choice if it
Mhm.
can be removed?
Yes.
And I think it's because people have, this is a long buildup of
Mhm.
giving too much credibility
Mhm.
to the medical profession,
Mhm.
given the pharmaceutical racketeering.
Mhm.
We do know from dozens of legal cases and extensive documentation that the drug companies have been
Mhm.
hiding the ill effects of their drugs. They've been hiding mortality. They've been hiding diabetes as an effect. They've been hiding heart disease as an effect of the drugs. We know
Mhm.
that the pharmaceutical companies are not reliable sources of information, but
Mhm.
the government is promoting the pharmaceutical companies as reliable sources of information.
Mhm.
So the government is using its credibility to
Mhm.
shore up, which is to create wrongful credibility for the
Mhm.
pharmaceutical industry. But this
Mhm.
is all based on what people believe. If
Mhm.
people believe medical authorities,
Mhm.
if they believe government officials,
Mhm.
then that economic policy is going to go through. And the question is, the government has the power with police forces and with military forces
Mhm.
to enforce a policy against the will of the majority.
Yes.
Dealing with very profound issues. Is there
Mm.
some divine intervention? Is there some higher power than government and oligarchs?
Yes. And you have just said that is it all, and I agree with you. It all comes down to the beliefs of majority. And why do the people believe the government? Why do the people believe in the system? So if people stop believing in the system, then the system would lose credibility. When the system loses credibility, then uh, it will crash, or it is, or I think it's not going to crash because they are too big to fall. I think they are. We will see some radical changes if people stop believing in the system.
Well, I think Pakistan is a good place to actually describe the issue,
Mm-hmm.
which is what happens is the consensus or the majority divides into
Mm-hmm.
two. It's
Mm-hmm.
like Pakistan divided from India.
Mm-hmm.
And so the people are divided.
Mhm.
There are those who do not find the government or the medical authorities credible.
Mhm.
There's those who believe the government officials and
Mhm.
medical authorities. And that means that the population is going to split into
Mhm.
two groups.
Mhm.
Usually that means two different countries: East and
Mhm.
West Germany, North and
Mhm.
South Korea,
Mhm.
Pakistan and India,
Yes.
Yugoslavia divided into
Mhm.
Croatia and Serbia,
Mhm.
and forget the other name. But
Yes.
usually a
Mhm.
country divides. That happened during the Civil War. The
Yes.
United States divided into North and South.
Yes.
And then the consensus was that slavery would be
Mhm.
abolished, but the abolitionists were not the majority. It was
Mhm.
a very small minority that
Mhm.
wanted to abolish slavery.
Mhm.
This happened in Europe. There was a division, the Protestant Reformation, from the control of Rome. Rome,
Mhm.
through religion, was controlling Europe, and then a division occurred, which was the Protestant Reformation, which should have been
Mhm.
called the Protestant Civil War, and England and Germany and other countries broke from the control of Rome.
Yes.
So we have
There.
a division coming, and
Mhm.
the people in power in the globe say, no, there's not going to be a division this time.
Mhm.
I think that happened during Nazi Germany.
Mhm.
The Germans said they're just going to exterminate or put into concentration camps those who do not agree with the consensus.
Mhm.
And I think those in power today are going to call the concentration camps quarantine camps.
Mhm.
So the question is, how powerful can the minority get? Can the
Mhm.
minority get as powerful as the US abolitionists, who were
Mhm.
very small in number, that allowed slavery to be abolished?
Mhm.
So the question is, how powerful is the minority? And it's not based on military,
Mhm.
it's not based upon political power or economic power.
Mhm.
So, what is it based upon? I think
It's,
it's based upon knowledge. So, though
yes.
knowledge is ignored
Mhm.
initially, I think in the
Mhm.
end, knowledge plays a big role.
Yes.
And
Knowledge is a threat to the majority. Knowledge
yes,
is a threat to the majority. Yes.
because knowledge can enable a minority to
Mhm.
overthrow the consensus of the majority.
Yes. It could make people to see things what others cannot see.
The thing which was the American Revolution, when
Mhm.
the United States divided from England, again,
Mhm.
this was a division,
Mhm.
was the concept of human rights or individual rights, that
Mhm.
people had the protected right of choosing their beliefs,
Mhm.
not only in religion, but in science. And
Mhm.
today, the consensus says science is the religion or system of beliefs, and you're not
Mhm.
allowed to disagree with it. And the
Mhm.
scientists who create studies that disagree with the consensus, they tend to be fired from their jobs or discredited, because science has become a belief system in which people who disagree are removed from the religion or the belief system, which is science.
Mhm.
And this has been always true, that
Mhm.
that all change and progress has been done by one person or a minority, and that
Mhm.
one person or the minority had to back down the majority and the authorities. And that's
Mhm.
based on knowledge. But it has to be based on a knowledge that through natural law wins its case.
Mhm.
The abolition of slavery lost its case, which was Dred Scott sued in the United States. He was a slave and he was taken to
Mhm.
a free territory. And then he
Mhm.
went to court saying he should no longer be owned by his owners. And it went
Mhm.
up to the Supreme Court and it rejected the case and made slavery de facto, which is by the deed, legal in all United States. Before that time, slavery was only legal in some of the states, not all of them.
Mhm.
So the majority made slavery legal in all the United
Legal.
States. And as a result of that, a great war happened. And after
Mhm.
that great war, it was recognized that it was a horrible war. And so there
Mhm.
was abolition of slavery.
Mhm.
But that was done by a minority. We're at the same point.
Mhm.
The slavery is medical slavery, which is
Mhm.
mandatory vaccines, mandatory mental health care, that
Mhm.
the issue is patients' rights, that a
Mhm.
patient has a right to refuse and choose the medical care that they deem or they feel is going to help, which is
Yes.
we cannot assume an expert is first concerned with the health of their patient. We
Mhm.
have to assume benevolence on experts, and that assumption is not really held up by history. Experts tend to be motivated by politics and profit, not by concern for the public.
Mhm.
So that's credibility. How long are people going to uphold it? The problem is
Mhm.
the majority seem to uphold the credibility of experts and ignore the experts who disagree.
Mhm.
So I think knowledge will win, but how it wins, we don't know. I mean,
We don't
it's a
know. Yeah, it's a very tricky question. How would the knowledge wins?
yeah, and how will correct legal argument win if it can't
Mhm.
win in court?
Mhm.
Because Dred Scott lost his case in court,
Mhm.
but then a year later he was
Mhm.
freed as a slave. He won his case in reality. He
Mhm.
lost it in court.
Mhm.
So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with how do we win a case or a position in reality? We can't win it in court. We
Mhm.
can't win it in public, but doesn't mean we can't win our case.
Mhm.
So that's sort of getting into metaphysics of law,
Yeah,
which is,
it seems like that the whole world is going to be uh, another civil war.
well, I think people are smarter than war. I,
Mhm.
I don't think people have very good knowledge in science,
Mhm.
but they have a sense that violence is wrong. I think
Mhm.
most people,
Mhm.
which is about 80%,
Uh,
do not
I think
want war.
the part of the world where I live in, I don't see that 80% uh, want peace. They want to push their beliefs. So I live in a religious society, and to them their beliefs are more important to them than the reason. So they want to push their beliefs that they are the right people even through anything.
But you know, what happens then
Mhm.
is bigger bullies push their beliefs. So
Okay.
their karma or the consequences of them
Mhm.
being bullies to people who
Mhm.
don't believe as they believe,
Mhm.
they get the United States or England or China now
Mhm.
pushing their beliefs on them.
Mhm.
So there does seem to be consequences to wrongdoing. Even if
Mhm.
people don't want to admit that they're doing wrong, there's
Mhm.
there's deep consequences to doing what is wrong.
Mhm.
So in your country where people want to push their specific beliefs on people,
Mhm.
well, United States and China and England are going to push their beliefs on them.
Yes.
So it's
So the bigger
so
bullies
you
are
want to
fighting.
go and chop off someone's head, then the
Yeah.
United States and England going to send a drone and destroy
Mhm.
your whole wedding or funeral procession or your village.
Yeah, they
So
have done
you,
it.
yeah,
They
so
have
if you're
done
going to
it.
bully people, people are going to
Hmm.
bully you.
Yes.
And two wrongs don't make a right. Two wrongs
Yes.
make history.
Yes.
I'm I'm not saying that's correct.
Mm.
So war becomes so ugly
Mm-hmm.
that people finally say, well, maybe we should recognize human rights.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should accept differences.
Mm-hmm.
But the United States pushed it to a very ugly war because it was Christian beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Slavery was justified from the Bible, the holy book of the Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And they pushed their beliefs of slavery from the Bible until their own homes and their own lives were being destroyed.
Yes.
So, abolition of slavery was the result of a lot of pain because people finally recognized that what they were doing was not correct.
So,
But
how many people were killed in the Civil War, in the American Civil War? How many
I
people
would
lost their life?
estimate, I know some of the battles had as much as 50,000. So probably at
Mm-hmm.
least 200,000 people were killed. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
can look it up real quick if you got a minute. But the U.S.
Oh,
Civil War, the casualties
mm-hmm.
were in hundreds of thousands.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, it was 600 and um, 20,000 is the estimate. About 500,000 people died
Oh
in the
my.
Civil War, and that
More than
was
half a
the biggest.
million.
Yeah,
More
more
than
than
half
half.
a million.
And besides all the farms and land destroyed in towns,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it was a major loss given the population back then.
Mm-hmm.
But wrong things continue and continue. We're at a turning point in history
Mm-hmm.
where there's an attempt to create a global empire,
Mm-hmm.
and what's going to happen, no one really knows.
Mm-hmm.
But we do see that wrong consensus like slavery or this mask and quarantine can't be
Mm-hmm.
maintained forever. Now,
Mm-hmm.
slavery did last for about 200 years,
Oh my.
yeah, which was a long time, 200 years.
A very long period. And I think 6 or 7 generations they went through the period of slavery.
Yeah, it was quite a long time, but it changed. It didn't
Yes.
stay the same.
Yes.
Initially, it wasn't just Africans. Initially,
Mm-hmm.
it was indentured slavery. The
Mm-hmm.
American Indians had slaves.
Yeah.
Then it became just African American descendants.
Mm-hmm.
Then it was in just some of the states. And as soon
Mm-hmm.
as it was extended to all the states, then it ended.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, there's usually been what's called an escape valve.
Mm-hmm.
A wrongful consensus is imposed, like the Inquisition or the control of Rome, Roman Catholicism over Europe, and then people left for the New World. They immigrated.
Mm-hmm.
So usually there is some mechanism to allow people to leave or to separate. And in this situation, we don't have that. We have a global movement to control the economy.
Mm-hmm.
What is unusual here, this is economic.
Mm-hmm.
This is economic more than military. Even in Australia, people
Mm-hmm.
on government subsidies, if they don't have their children vaccinated, they don't get
Mm-hmm.
the government subsidies, which is, and it's also true with the US. For it to wage its war, it no longer has a draft, it has an economic situation in which most people can't afford hospitalization, they can't afford college, so they go
Mhm.
into the military. So it's an
Mhm.
economic draft. And that's the same what's going on here, economic pressures, which is if you want to go to a store or
Mhm.
you want to go to your job, you're supposed to wear a mask. So
Mhm.
economic pressures are being used to enforce a global policy.
Mhm.
And the question is, what really is economics? Economics
Mhm.
is claiming that your energy to survive is based on
Mhm.
currency. Now, it could be a credit card, it could
Mhm.
be digital money, but
Mhm.
basically, economics is based upon that you have some form of currency to exchange, and
Yes.
those in power want to block their currency.
Mhm.
But an interesting thing is also happening. I was going to teach, I was an assistant teacher. I helped
Mhm.
students in labs and with projects because I only
Mhm.
have a bachelor's degree.
Mhm.
I was going to continue this part time for many years, and I get paid okay. I don't get paid a lot, but it's
Mhm.
almost fair. It's pretty close to fair,
Mhm.
and particularly now that I'm older and slower, it became
Mhm.
more fair.
Mhm.
And the the job I did every day was to teach students, and now I'm
Mhm.
lecturing online. In fact, a couple of my students
Mhm.
tell me that they're happy they can still listen to me because they liked me in class
Mhm.
and they enjoyed my lectures. But I
Mhm.
don't get paid for this. I
Okay.
don't get paid for teaching online. And I can teach.
Mhm.
I can teach basic economics like what is selling short, what is the difference
Mhm.
between a bond and a stock, what
Mhm.
what are different currency exchange rates, what
Mhm.
are the what does the World Bank do? I can actually teach what people
Mhm.
here in school, and I
Mhm.
know enough biology. I can teach some basic
Mhm.
biological concepts in relationship to vaccines. So I'm still
Mhm.
teaching almost at a
Mhm.
college level, but I'm not getting paid. So while
Okay.
those in power
Mhm.
are increasing the emphasis of currency, some of
Mhm.
us are changing to a non currency based system. And
Mhm.
the question is, and the ancient Hindus raised this, they felt that, and we did a video on this on architecture, that old
Yes.
architecture seemed to reflect that a high level of technology was used before, that this is not
Yes.
the first time human
Yes.
beings have reached a high level of technology. In
Yeah.
fact, I think the
I think.
Hindus say this is the fourth
Mhm.
yuk or yoga, the
Mhm.
fourth era, which is
Mhm.
three have come before us and collapsed. In
Mhm.
fact, I have a Chinese friend, and he
Mhm.
feels this is the generation in which
Mhm.
civilization will collapse again and start all over,
Mhm.
which is without
So
currency.
yeah, I think we have discussed this that topic that we are not the most advanced civilization. Even we are not even close to the civilization, advanced civilization that there was here on Earth hundreds and thousands of years ago. We the ancient pyramids and the architect around the globe is a living proof of those civilizations that they were more advanced and more sophisticated and they were more tech than us.
Right. The mathematics is
Mhm.
very clear. And let me
Mhm.
present the mathematics of that.
Mhm.
Biologists feel
Mhm.
the basic human species
Mhm.
is almost 1 million years old.
Mhm.
That the basic intelligence that we have today, that human species has been around 1 million years.
Mhm.
But our technology is only developed in the last basically 500 years.
Mhm.
And 500 years in a million years doesn't mean anything. There could have
Yeah.
been a lot of 500 years in that million years where
Mhm.
technology developed, but that
Mhm.
implies very big changes.
Mhm.
It implies huge amount of deposition or depositing of earth. The civilizations are under oceans, under miles of soil,
Mhm.
because though we find some of these older temples and pyramids,
Mhm.
they're not the result of a global um, situation like we have today.
Yes.
And there have been authors like Immanuel Velikovsky that
Mhm.
feel evolution in history is not always slow, that there's
Mhm.
great cataclysms or disasters,
Mhm.
whether they're from asteroids or other planets, that huge changes happen.
Mhm.
And for the big example is if dinosaurs existed, which
Mhm.
I tend to think they did, there's
Mhm.
a lot of people who point out the fraud, and there's a lot of fraud in fossils.
Mhm.
Fossils are exaggerated. Most of the skeletons that you see are
Mhm.
actually made. Most animals were not discovered with complete skeletons.
Mhm.
There's a lot of questions of fraud in archaeology and in paleontology.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of cover ups. There's a
Mhm.
lot of, there seems to be great evidence that
Mhm.
giant human beings 10 to 20 feet tall lived
Mhm.
in much of the part of the world. And when
Mhm.
these skeletons of that size are sent to museums,
Mhm.
they're disregarded and you can't find them anymore. So
Mhm.
there's been an attempt to hide history, particularly recent discoveries of giant human beings.
Mhm.
So we don't really know what happened in the past. It's
Mhm.
not the position we're given. I mean, the big debate in archaeology is with geologists. Geologists claim, given the vertical erosion on the Sphinx,
Mhm.
that it should be
I
at
think.
least 12,000 years old.
Mhm. I think we should
And
get back to the economics. I think we have covered much archaeology and history.
yeah, so the economics is for it to be stable. This is
Mhm.
my theory. This is my
Mhm.
opinion.
Mhm.
For economics to be stable,
Mhm.
which is functional, and for the country not to fall apart,
Mhm.
the currency, the movement of currency, needs to represent the movement of energy between people.
Mhm.
Not what, you know, 5 or 10 oligarchs think on the top. The
Mhm.
movement of currency needs to somewhat respond to
Mhm.
the movement of energy between people. And let me develop that. Where knowledge is power, where
Mhm.
currency represents energy,
Mhm.
which is
Currency
there is a
represents
certain
energy.
amount of there is value in goodness and compassion.
Mhm.
Wouldn't you agree there's value in goodness and compassion?
Okay. Yes, I do agree.
So if good intelligent people
Mhm.
are deprived of currency, that's
Mhm.
an imbalance of currency.
Mhm. Mhm.
So my feeling is, and there's many causes for wars and invasion,
Mhm.
was Saddam Hussein
Mhm.
was too discriminatory and blocked currency from too
Mhm.
many good people.
Mhm.
So United States invaded with cash loads, planes of cash,
Mhm.
and gave out currency to
Mhm.
different people, which is any government tries to get currency to people who support that government.
Mhm.
But if they don't get currency to the good people,
Mhm.
that government may become unstable because the currency no longer represents the real flow of information. Now, you can be good and not have much energy
Mhm.
because you're in conflict with too many people.
Mhm.
But I think to a certain extent, each person, besides the collective energy, has a certain amount of individual energy.
Mhm.
And when a government refuses to supply that person with adequate currency to represent that energy,
Mhm.
that country becomes unstable,
Mhm.
which was the issue with slavery, may have been there was not enough currency to
Mhm.
pay people for working on the cotton farms.
Mhm.
So Alexander Hamilton, who was an advisor to George Washington, who was the head of the American Revolution,
Mhm.
he pushed for the development of a large currency in the United States.
Mhm.
So the distribution of currency somewhat determines the stability of a country. And a
Mhm.
country becomes unstable when the leaders of that country restrict the currency away from people who really have the energy the currency is supposed to represent, which
Mhm.
is we can influence the collective. This is even the story, I think, of Mohammed and Malaripa. We can go to a cave and pray,
Mhm.
contemplate, and
Mhm.
influence the collective. And our
Mhm.
influence may be so great, we need to be supplied with currency to
Mhm.
represent that influence. And if the
Mhm.
government refuses us currency, it is trying to exterminate those who have a different opinion, like the Germans did with their concentration camps.
Mhm.
But if the people survive, the government falls.
Mhm.
So Saddam Hussein may have fell because he restricted his currency from people who were in protest of his wars.
Mhm.
So we can look at currency as representing a basic energy exchange. And if the
Mhm.
currency is not reasonable enough, the state may fall,
Mhm.
which is in the case of India. India may have restricted currency to some
Mhm.
extent to
Mhm.
Islamic people. So for the states to be stable, there had to be two states, Pakistan
Mhm.
and India, that had different exchange rates and currency distributions.
Mhm.
And the same thing with the Soviet Union. Soviet Union wanted to impose one currency on a lot of countries, and that may not have been reflective of the actual energy or the actual collective credibility of each person.
Mhm.
So I think economics is a basis of a stability of a country in the sense that certain people have a certain amount of credibility, even by themselves. And the
Mhm.
state has to recognize that. And
Mhm.
generals say in this regard
Mhm.
that logistics is the
Mhm.
real basis of who wins the war.
Mhm.
Now, the statement that logistics is the basis of who wins the war, we can
Mhm.
really say is economics is logistics.
Mhm.
So economics is the basis of who wins the war. And that may be who is willing to supply those people deserving of supplies, which is if the government is not willing to use the currency to supply those deserving of supplies, it becomes unstable. And another group of people can come in who are more willing to distribute currency to those who deserve supplies and
Mhm.
replace the old government. So economics may be the basis of war in the
mhm,
sense that we naturally may resource a certain amount of supplies.
mhm,
And the current economic system is not recognizing correctly people of knowledge. Let me repeat that. The
the
current
current
economic system is not
mhm,
correctly recognizing people of knowledge, so it
mhm,
may become unstable, the government.
mhm, yes,
Now, how it becomes unstable
mhm,
could be earthquake,
mhm,
could be invasion,
mhm,
it could be civil war. I
mhm,
think history shows governments become unstable in many different ways.
mhm,
And I think the more restrictive is the government,
mhm,
the more it's unstable.
mhm,
So the issue is a free market, which is a free flow of currency,
mhm,
allows stability. And
yes,
dictatorship really is a restriction on currency.
mhm,
And I think the economic point of view may be the most insightful.
mhm. Well, I love the economic point of view on currency as power and knowledge as power. And the reason a government is not valuing the people with knowledge is because the people with knowledge are a great threat to the majority, to the system. And it can, as you said, it can bring civil war, it can bring earthquake, it can it can fall down the whole government, the whole system.
Yeah, basically, people of knowledge need to be recognized. And at
Mm-hmm.
some point, if they're not recognized, the system becomes unstable. And that's
The,
even in English. If you don't recognize the prophet is gone, which is
mm-hmm,
for you to have it's a phonetic meaning. A
mm-hmm,
prophet needs to have currency, profit, because
yeah,
they're raising the awareness of human beings.
mm-hmm. So I think we have covered enough in our today's live video. We have
Okay,
started from the we have started from the social class and economic point of view. Then we discussed how the from the historical point of view, how the Roman Catholic and how the majority is affected. Majority pushes their belief on the minority. How the bigger bullies they kill the smaller bullies, and finally we have discussed that the current economic system is not recognizing the people with knowledge or the knowledgeable people. So I think that's it for today.
okay,
Thank
just
you
one
so
comment.
much.
I think we have to recognize we don't
Mhm,
know what a majority thinks. A
mhm,
consensus is presented by the mass media and by
mhm,
politicians to claim
mhm,
their consensus is majority
mhm,
opinion. We really
mhm,
don't know what majority opinion is. And I think the
mhm,
Hillary Trump election in
mhm,
2016, where the polls all predicted Hillary, showed
mhm,
the polls are not accurate, that a
mhm,
consensus is projected. We not necessarily have a majority opinion, but a projected consensus.
mhm.
Okay, I just want to make that consensus thinking should not be ignored. It's a major
Yes,
fact.
yes, indeed, it is a consensus. Uh, Thinking is a major factor. And thank you so much, Ed, for joining us. And I think that's it for today. If you guys have any question, leave it in the comment box below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks so much.